Everybody, and those of you still taking coffee and tea, if you could come with your coffee and tea and balance on your laps, that would be fantastic. I respect coffee and tea because where I come from in Kenya, tea is king and queen and princess all in one. But we need to get started. We have a tight program and an interesting conversation going. Hello, I know you can see me and I know you can hear me. Guys at the back. Stigmata, hi. Come now. Good to see you. All right. Just to be clear, this is workstream 1. So if you're in the wrong room, please stay. It's still fun. We're going to close the doors a little bit so that we don't have too much movement going on. Thank you for those who have heard. Excuse me. All right. Thank you. If you're behind there, I'm assuming you're refreshing your cup of coffee. Or tea. Or water. All right. Welcome to today. My name is Chilande Kuloba. I am usually based in Nairobi, Kenya, where I run Warande Advisory. But for today, for the next 3 days, for those who keep coming to this room, I will be here. So hopefully you come back. And I'm just your moderator for today, but we have various specialists who come to talk to us about various topics. This particular first conversation of the day is building on to some of the teasers that we've had from the plenary session, which basically we are going straight in and talking about live instruments. I know there's been big words put out there today, but the folks here are going to break down to us what that looks like and what that means. Are we ready? Are we ready? 1 minute? Okay, I can keep talking. I'm a storyteller where I come from, so I can tell you stories. Yeah? But I don't think you came here to hear my stories. Today, what we're going to be looking at today is how we're going to be discussing some creative, innovative, new ways in which capital has been flowing. Today's conversation is really about money, how it's flowing, who's making decisions, what does it look like, what are those structures around it that are making it either easy or difficult for us to access some of this funding to resource the work that needs to be done. Here we're going to be looking at especially investment deal structures. The folks, the panelists today, sit in spaces that are designing what that looks like. They'll be giving us a lot of real examples of what that has been like. And I encourage you, hopefully I think we will do a good job of trying to leave some space so you can actually contribute to some of the ideas that are going to be put out there. We're also going to be looking at risk, this whole idea of risk. What is the architecture around it? Who defines what risk is? How are we defining it, especially in the investment space? What is working and what is not? What are we seeing we need to amplify? What are some of the ideas you also have from your spaces around how you've been treating the conversations around risk and what does look like? And then just various financial models and how they're being deployed. So we have 4 amazing specialists. In their defense, we found out that MacBooks do not quite operate. So we are having to jump through hoops and redeploy ourselves, the instruments of trade, our instruments of trade. So we are having to put everything on a PC. So that's what's happening there. Before we get started, housekeeping, is there anybody who needs translation? Nobody needs translation? Okay, I think we're good. All right. They didn't hear my question. Hi, Margaret. Do you need translation for my question? Guys, I've not had enough coffee for this. there's a rogue group here. I feel like I should redistribute them. If you're seated next to someone who looks like they have not heard me because they can't hear my language, let me know. All right. Team. So as we wait for the team to be settled, maybe let me just poll real quick who's in this room today. If you consider yourself a frontline worker, a doer, a grantee, I don't know, those different words. Those who are at the front line of work, could you put your hand up just so we see who's in the room so that we can contextualize? Okay, so we've got folks. You're not sure? Let me see if I get the other one then, your other hand. All right, so we have folks that are considering themselves at the front line who need a lot of these resources and to diversify into these new ways of operating with money. Who are those who are actually distributing resources, or resource holders, or funders, or donors? If you consider yourself, put your hand up bravely. This is a safe space. There they put it up bravely. This is a safe space, I hope. All right, so we have some of those. Maybe I should have broken down the different types of funding that is available. Is there anybody who represents or works with government? We need government in this space as well. They do influence our ability to invest. No government. Or no one brave enough to identify as government. That's also something. Okay, so maybe next time we'll look into that, because we do need them with this particular conversation. Who have I missed out? Who's not feeling included? Huh? Did you say something? Oh, yes. Are there community members? Yes. I know. There we go. Yes, we have. I forgot. Oh, okay. Hey, and that is a dangerous one. I might just get cancelled. Who identifies as media? Those who help us shape our narratives. There we go. Fantastic. I'm so social media. It's media. Those who help us shape narratives out there and get our messages out. Okay, that's good. We have actually a good number. It's fantastic. Who else is missing? Young people who considers themselves youth. There we go. I guess it depends also on where you're coming from. Okay, I see youth. Youth, not at heart. All right, so I think the team is ready. Sorry, I've been just keeping the room warm. All right, so we are going to get started. We have 4 fantastic panelists that are going to come through one after the other. We're going to start off with Paris. And Paris, before you get started, you'll tell us a little bit about where your orientation is coming from. But Paris is the lead international organizations, NGO and FBO. She's the one who interfaces with those of us who consider ourselves a nonprofit, but she's from the KCB Bank Group. So thank you, Paris, and over to you.
So good morning. I trust you've all enjoyed the wonderful coffee that Addis has to offer. So I know we are maybe getting a bit late into this, so I will get straight into it. My name is Paris Kamau. I'm the lead for international organizations and the development sector at KCB Bank Group. I've been in the industry for over the last 15 years and specializing in this sector for over the last 8 years. KCB Bank Group is the second largest bank in East and Central Africa, right below the Commercial Bank of Ethiopia, so largest by asset size, commanding a portfolio of over 2.3 trillion. But these are not just numbers, and I'll show you how this is relevant for this room. So KCB Group beyond the transactional banking model, we have presence in 7 regions. Let me start with Ethiopia. We have a representative office in Ethiopia, but we're also in Uganda, Tanzania, Rwanda, South Sudan, DRC. We have a representative office as well in Brussels. I hope those are 7, and Burundi. So we command 7 regions. But those are not just regions. We are talking about impact and the lives of the people, the livelihoods that we are actually touching. KCB Bank also has various subsidiaries, cutting across KCB Asset Management, KCB Investment Bank. We do have digital financial solutions that we have a majority shareholding in. This is Riverbank and Pesapal. And critical also for this room is that KCB Bank Group also has KCB Foundation. And I know that's an interesting conversation because I've met some of you in this room who are now telling me or challenging the private sector and financial institutions like KCB Bank that you're making profits on one hand, how are you deploying those profits? But you've gone ahead to now set up foundations which are competing, allow me to use that word in quotes, with organizations seated in this room. But are we really competing? And from the conversations that have been, and the tone that has been set from today's talk and the conversations that have been going on for over the last couple of months is on collaboration. So maybe also to mention, I'm here with my colleagues, one from KCB Bank. Philippa, if you're here, please wave to the crowd. She handles the treasury desk, but I'm also here with Alex from the KCB Foundation. So that's the guy I can see you're all interested in. Yeah, but I'll explain briefly how all this comes together. So let me first dwell on the competing elements of the KCB Foundation. It's not really for competition. So KCB Bank makes profits. I think in the last quarter that we announced, we made 24.4 billion shillings in profit. Then we take a percentage of that, 1% of that profit goes into the foundation, which is the arm that the bank uses to drive social impact, which is what most organizations in this room do. So how does working with KCB Bank and KCB Foundation and the organizations which are represented here actually look like? It's in many areas. It's in implementation, it's in technical assistance, it's in co-bidding for projects, because what we have been challenged today is how do we scale? And that is coming quickly into what we are getting into in terms of this work stream. Blended finance, de-risking, all this, jargon, because I assume not everyone in this room is a finance expert. So I'll avoid a lot of jargon. This discussion can take hours, and banking can be complex and complicated, and that's the last thing I believe anyone in this room requires. We will also go briefly, together with the moderators here, into the practical application of blended finance. And perhaps if I can, maybe to start off the conversation, we've talked a lot, and even in today's morning, I picked keywords from the presenter. De-risk, create, retain, and growth. So we're all aware that philanthropic aid is, quickly coming down. We're now seeing, as was also presented yesterday, diaspora remittances outgrowing aid, which is flowing into the various countries and into the continent. So our discussion today is based on what you currently have, what you're about to receive in terms of aid, how do we make it sustainable? What is the role of financial institutions like a bank in facilitating that sustainability and scalability? This impact could cut across various streams. Say you're an organization focused on agriculture, focused on the youth, focused on women, or focused on SMEs. And a donor comes in today, or there's a donor seated in this room, and you want to make your projects more sustainable. What role will a bank play? And these models have been changing over time. We do now have guarantee-funded schemes where the whole essence of blended finance is de-risking. De-risking meaning sectors which a financial institution like a bank would traditionally consider high risk, you're coming to tell the bank that these are bankable clients. I will take up the risk that you see in lending to them. And what we're trying to achieve here is not just impact, but it's introducing your beneficiaries to the financial system so that they are now able to access financial credit, they have financial literacy, and we now have, of course, an element of organizations which are also seated here who are coming in terms of the technical assistance. So this comes in various models, and my moderators will also focus on this. You could have options of blended finance where you as an organization or as a donor, you come to a financial institution, and we are now seeing NGOs and DFIs and philanthropic organizations and individuals quickly moving away from grants. Meaning you would go to an area, say for argument's sake, you go to Kakuma, and the refugees there, you would have UN agencies or some of the NGOs going to those communities and giving those individuals monthly handouts or grants, right, for sustainability and to drive either on basic needs or to even enhance economic empowerment. But you realize that this aid is slowly coming to an end, and you come to a financial institution and tell them, this 50 million shillings or $5 million, or whatever amount, I'm just using this for argument's sake, that I was going to give to these beneficiaries, a commercial bank's core objective is in commercial lending, and of course advisory as well. Keep this 100 million with you, lend to these individuals at a certain agreed rate, and the money that I'm keeping with you is the guaranteeing fund that will help you look at these clients as bankable. And I know that's also another word that has been going around. Bankable because the risk elements that a bank considers in a traditional setting is what also informs the kind of lending rates that we are talking about when we look to certain sectors. And I'll give an example of agriculture. Agriculture has been traditionally considered as a high-risk sector in terms of financial institutions wanting to lend to women or youth or the blue economy, which is in that sector because of various conditions. Weather, insurance, name it. But you as an organization, you're in that sector, but you don't have the capacity to continue giving grants to these individuals and beneficiaries. So what do? The little funding or the much funding that you have will unlock more capital, because for I as a bank, I would traditionally perhaps not be able to lend to certain individuals because of the risk element. And when I do, it is at such a high commercial rate that these individuals are not able to sustain it. So you'll say, I will take up that risk and de-risk them. So that's what this de-risking word actually means. And then if, say for argument's sake, the current lending rates are between 15 to 18%, we sit down with you and come up with a product design that I will showcase shortly, and say, lend to these people at 7%. What does that do? You're enabling these people in terms of their financial capabilities. Number two, you're unlocking capital. Because with your $2 million, for instance, you've unlocked $6 million because the bank is now putting in its money. That's one form of blended finance. We also have other forms of revolving fund schemes where you say, and these are practical programs that we're already running, where I'll give an example of an organization and agency we're working with in Kakuma. An organization comes to the bank and says, for the kind of beneficiaries that we're looking at, or for the kind of sector that we're looking at, we don't want them to be charged any interest rate. So I want these individuals to access $1 million in terms of credit. I will take up the entire risk, but I still want these guys to be introduced to the financial system. So the only thing that the bank will charge you in that case is the facilitation fee, which ranges between 3 to 5%, depending on various other factors. So I don't want to maybe take long on this, but to move on maybe to the last element of this presentation is in terms of what are some of the due diligence tools and that banks deploy and employ for this kind of models, and what are some of the challenges that we have faced. So assuming today you target individuals, let me not call them that, the beneficiaries that your program has identified are women in gender-based violence. We're currently working with a consortium where 4 NGOs come together, they got some funding, but the first tranche of that funding goes into grants, where they have identified these women who are in gender-based violence. Of course, the first thing to do is help them settle down, acclimatize, take them into a program in terms of mentorship, and they give them grants to start up these businesses. They are the ones who do the capacity building, the technical assistance, because at the end of the day, these individuals have to be ready to be introduced to the financial system. I say this because these are some of the due diligence tools at the end of the day, and I think that's the challenge we've been getting from this sector. Your traditional model of lending and transacting with clients, does it actually apply when it comes to this sector? Because to be honest, a lot of the individuals or groups that you're targeting, are they people whom I will say, for argument's sake, a normal client walks into the bank today, the first thing I'll ask you is, please give me your financial statements for the last 12 months. Do they have them? They don't. Show me your financial records for the last 3 years and how your business has been operating. Yet you're just dealing with a woman in a very remote area who just wants to go to the market, buy vegetables, come and sell them, right? So is the financial model that is currently being used actually applicable in terms of this design and model? So we come together with these organizations and we discuss various factors. For instance, how long will this facility or loan be running for? Okay? Which sectors are you targeting? What kind of impact are you looking at? Should this client fail to pay back because their business perhaps did not pick up? Remember, these are individuals who have probably never even ran a business before. But we work with the foundation as well in terms of incubation. And I think those are some of the lessons that we have learned over time. There is a bank, you could be so quick to go into lending to make the profit, but who are you actually lending to? Is it someone who even has the basic knowledge of recording, bookkeeping? And those are some of the individuals that you're dealing with in this room. Not, the high end and the, all that. So Briefly, maybe I can just showcase what that product design actually looks like. I had initially mentioned that beyond a financial institution's key objective of commercial lending, we do also come in terms of advisory. And advisory here meaning that for the certain target groups of individuals that you're having, the financial institution then should also have the capability of advising or having certain products that actually fit into your system and into what you're trying to achieve. What I mean by this is this. For instance, KCB Bank Group is running the green agenda under the Ministry of Education in Kenya, whereby we have been tasked to implement clean cooking for over the 3,000 learning institutions in that country. So, assuming you're also looking into sustainability, what would a partnership or this model look like in that instance? We also have products which only focus on women, and this also came from a data analysis and a preview of that sector that showed that women have had a challenge in accessing finance, but the kind of women you're looking at are people who only want 1,000 shillings, 5,000 shillings to start off a business or go to the market and, and start, making income by themselves. And I think that speaks to what we are all trying to achieve in terms of sustainability, and making these individuals and beneficiaries independent. That the day these organizations and your organizations walk out of an area, you're leaving that economy or that region financially improved and empowered, and they're able to sustain themselves. So in practical application, this is what blended finance is. So you get your funding of, say, for argument's sake, 10 million shillings or 50 million shillings. You want to deploy blended finance in your models, which is moving away from the traditional giving of grants. What does that actually mean when you come to a financial institution? It means you give us the 10 million and we keep it in a separate account. I will call it an escrow account for argument's sake, or just the bank holding these funds. And then we sit with you and design a product for the individuals with whom you're targeting. This product, we will discuss the individuals you're targeting, how much do you want them to access in this facility, okay? So we will give the ranges in terms of, the portfolio holding per beneficiary, and this is what you're seeing there, minimum amount, maximum amount, depending on the kind of business that they're also doing. And then we will discuss the maximum loan repayment periods for which each of these settings or funds will apply. So, of course, there's the amount, there's a period, and then maximum loan cycles. So say one of your beneficiaries, a farmer, a youth, an SME, comes to the bank, takes up a loan of 50,000, starts off a business. If they repay this loan in the next 3 months, and remember also, as a financial institution, we are here also to monitor how this business is performing, which is our core business. How many cycles does this individual get to access this fund? Remember, the money that you put in the bank is intact. And I think that's the sustainability that we're talking about. It has not been touched. But of course, there are elements here where we say, at what point do we tap into these funds? At the point of default, right? And of course, that also comes, is structured differently. Then we have grace period, meaning you give an individual 20,000 today to start a business. Do you expect them to start off repaying the loan immediately? Not at all. So in the product design, we also discuss with the institution in terms of the grace period you'd want us to give to these individuals. The The loan processing fees, that is also, of course, a discussion with the client. There's a credit life insurance, which comes with any credit facility going to individuals or organizations. And then, of course, there's the interest rate that will apply for these individuals. This is dependent on various factors. One, the impact that you're trying to achieve. Number two, the beneficiaries that you're targeting. Number three, the level of guarantee and de-risking that you're willing to take up as an organization. Because if you're de-risking the entire facilities going to these beneficiaries, it means that the interest rate will be lower. But if you're only de-risking 20% and the bank will have to come in and put in their 80% of its own money, the rate goes higher. Then there's, of course, the issue of interest on late payments. This is also discussed with the clients, which clients are eligible for this product. This is a pipeline which is coming from yourselves to the bank. And also it depends. We discuss, is the assessment going to be done by the bank or by yourselves, and at what point? So in a nutshell, and to close off my presentation, this is what blended finance looks like. This is what the famous de-risking word that has been going around actually means. A donor or an organization comes in, you take the early risk, which is the first risk portion, which is also another form of blended finance, or you're providing cheap capital for areas where a bank would normally not look at. And then the role of the financial institution is in commercial lending, but also to provide the commercial discipline, which perhaps and most likely you as an organization definitely does not have. Then, of course, we do have the NGO, which is implementing the project. The donor part and the NGOs can be interchanged. We do have the beneficiaries, who are the final receivers of this, of what you're trying to achieve, both in terms of impact and financial empowerment. And then we have, of course, the private investors who are looking at a model which is already running, and they're like, we can also put in our money into already this running scheme. So, yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Paris. Thank you for taking the time to really break it down, especially to those of us who are struggling to wrap around some of this financial jargon, and really breaking down the blended finance aspect especially. I think we're beginning to see how we can fit in or not. Keep some of your thoughts. Please note down your questions so that we can get a little bit more of, insights, and then we can, unless somebody is burning and wants to say one thing. No. All right, so we're going to move a little bit away from the banking sector. And I want to invite Andrew. We did hear a little bit about your model at the New Africa Fund, but at least from perspective of this whole idea about your whole investment model, I think it will be interesting to also hear your perspective. Switch a little bit from one type of finance model into another one. So welcome. Yeah. Andrew, you ready?
Sure.
All right, here you go.
Okay, we'll make it work just like this. I guess I get to be the first to say good afternoon. It's really good to be here with all of you. I see a lot of people standing in the back. Unlike Ethiopian Airlines, the seats in the front are the same price, so not rude to join us. My name is Andrew Keene. I work with the New Africa Fund, specifically on our impact investment fund, which I'll get to in a minute. And I think it's really unique to be in a session that has both an African bank and an American 501c3 charity talking about how we make it a real difference here, especially with social enterprises, especially with rewriting the rules around finance and financing. So the question that we hear and I hear a lot is how do we deploy more capital strategically to finance and scale within Africa? And as a recovering management consultant, we hear a lot of the same buzzwords and jargon that you're going to hear a lot of this week: blended finance, impact-linked finance, catalytic capitals, innovative risk structures, new investment vehicles. But rarely do we actually break any of those terms down in terms of actually seeing what does a deal look like under any of those banners. So it was very nice to see from KCB how they're doing that. And I think anytime you see those terms, it's worth pressing a bit further, because I think a lot of deals get left on the table because they're not well defined and they're not well understood, especially on the receiving end. And at the New Africa Fund, we have the blessing of not being a bank. We're a charity, and so our incentive structure is different, the flexibility we have is different, our funding is different, and our timelines are different. And that gives us opportunity to challenge a lot of assumptions, challenge a lot of traditional models, to pilot things. And what I get most excited about is actually co-creating business deals and investment opportunities with African SMEs and African social enterprises that make sense for us, given the mandate we have as a charity, and make sense for the African entities and their founders for their goals, and most importantly, for the impact that they're aiming to have in their communities. I think or at least from my perspective, I go to a lot of conferences like this, the problem usually isn't always capital. As you heard on the stage in the opening plenary, there's a lot of capital in the air. It's a matter of pulling it out of the air and putting it through a deal structure that makes sense, that is fair, that isn't predatory, and that delivers results and it delivers for all of the parties involved with some relative parity. And you heard a bit about this in the opening plenary, so I'm not going to repeat it. One of the just architectural issues that as a charity we aim to solve for and aim to stay away from is this notion that there's foreign donor money, it's going through a grant mechanism to an African NGO and then impacting community somehow. And we saw that very significantly through some of the major foreign funders, USAID. And Stephen mentioned in the opening plenary that we have a workshop right now in Kigali with organizations that went through the program I'm going to describe briefly. And a lot of them talk about the detriment that the end of financing from USAID caused. Not just that organizations were left struggling, it closed a lot of organizations overnight, which showed that, one, the organizations didn't really have agency, that they really weren't implementing their own agenda, that the funding was not as consistent and long-term as it was promised to be, and it was subject to political pressures and political sea changes that they had no role in whatsoever. And so all of the work that we do at the New Africa Fund is aimed at empowering organizations to be not at the whim of those pressures that they can't control and have no influence in. And so, the New Africa Fund, we've been talking a lot about the questions that we're asking, and how does that impact deal structures, how does that impact the conversations that we're having, and just repeating what was said earlier and repeating what I just said, we hear a lot of how do we fund organizations, how do we make investments, and not as much of how organizations fund themselves, and what role can we provide, not just in providing them funding, but providing them infrastructure to do their own fundraising. So about 2 years ago, we launched a program which we now call the Africa Fundraising Incubator. In brief, we put out an open call. Since the start of the program, we've gotten over 10,000 applications. So we have lists of over 10,000 NGOs across the continent that are doing amazing work in every sector you can imagine. Our impossible job is to, unfortunately, we can't accept 10,000 applicants or 3,000 every cohort. So we break that down into what we think are the most promising NGOs, CBOs, and social enterprises. And there's some overlap between those three. We're seeing an increasing number of NGOs, because of the challenges that I just mentioned, look for ways to generate their own revenue. They still might be a nonprofit, they still might be a charity, but they're finding other revenue models aside from philanthropy to support their work. In addition to social enterprises, which are chartered as businesses that are having incredible impact on their community. So since the start of the program, we've had, as I said, over 10,000 applications. We've broken them into 4 cohorts. The fourth cohort is meeting actually right now in Kigali, as I mentioned. There's of the selected organizations, there's a 30-day challenge. They have 30 days to raise as much money as they can from their local networks here in Africa, as well as their contacts family and friends from abroad. We facilitate that. We pass the money through to them at no cost. If they're Americans, we can issue a tax receipt, which is quite advantageous for American donors. And up to a certain amount, we match dollar for dollar. The organizations that perform the best, and that might not necessarily mean financially they raise the most, but they put the most into it, they activated parts of their community in creative ways that we haven't seen, or they're doing something just remarkable to mobilize resources locally. We invite them to a workshop where we give them even more training. The training comes from experts in the field and also fellow NGO leaders so that they can learn from not just external experts, but also their peers in the space. And then after that workshop, we consider these, especially the social enterprises, for an impact investment. And about a year ago, the board of the New Africa Fund took the decision to move our reserve fund of the organization, instead of investing it in traditional investments, which are conservative, to investing them in African SMEs and small businesses, which is a move that we spend a lot of time talking to other foundations and charities to do the same, maybe not to invest all of their reserve funds or endowments, but at least allocate a portion of that funding to invest in the same type of organizations and companies that they're doing grant making to. And so when we went to launch this investment, or this impact investment fund, what could have been overwhelming actually felt quite natural to us, because we were able to guide the impact investment fund with the same values that we guided the grant making of the organization, as well as the fundraising training program, which I just mentioned. And as it happened, we already had a pipeline of organizations and small businesses that we knew, we had a relationship, that we trust, that know us, and that immediately allowed us to get into, we talk about de-risking, that just the fact that we've watched these organizations perform already, we saw how they mobilized their community, we saw how they managed grant funding, allowed us to be that much further ahead when we went to launch this fund. And in the last year, we've deployed over $1 million across a handful of projects. I was asked earlier what the impact criteria are. For us, that's not an exit ticket. It's an entry requirement, and we knew what the impact of these organizations were because they came through this program. So we're able to see their impact in their communities, whether they're putting clean water ATMs in schools in rural Rwanda, or they're building affordable housing in bustling Nairobi. We talk about practical deal structures, and that's the last thing I'll say before I close, as a charity, we have more options on the table for financing. And the model that we landed on was the model of a recoverable grant, which looks similar to a loan, but it's actually built quite differently, and the incentive structure is quite different. Instead of a loan where the organization or the business is getting financing up front, and they do that project, and immediately from the starting line, they're an African NGO that owes money to a foreign investor. A recoverable grant puts us really as partners from day one, that's built on a significant amount of trust that we've built through the process that I just mentioned, and more that I could mention if we had more time. But it allows us from day one to say, not how are you going to pay us back, but how are you going to have the impact of putting more water ATMs in schools or building more affordable housing that, because of this deal structure, rewards us both, actually with greater reward to the organization themselves, and with the profit that we're able to make, we're able to fund the grant making piece that I mentioned before and bring more organizations through that fundraising training. I'm going to close there just because we're a bit behind time. I welcome anyone who's interested in learning more about what we do to be in touch. Happy to share more, happy to welcome other philanthropists and foundations who are interested in diversifying how they deploy capital, how they invest here, to join us. We have a great pipeline, as I just mentioned. I'd be happy to share that with you. So thank you so much for being here, and thank you for your time.
Thank you, Andrew. Did you mention how many countries you're doing this? You have a presence in now, so far?
The fundraising training is in 30 plus countries.
Okay.
The impact investing is in 4 countries so far, but
Amazing.
growing.
Thank you. Lots of experience, I think, to share in terms of what are the trends you're seeing, what are the insights you're gathering from all of that. We've heard about impact investment funds, we've heard about incubator programs, 30-day challenges, all very interesting. I wanted to switch a little bit now, and I'm going to invite another perspective from AG Group. I'm going to invite you to come over. Sandrine?
Thank you very much. So for this session, we'll have about 25 minutes, and I want that to be as interactive as possible. So the objective is really to share the lessons learned from EG Capital on how we've used blended finance and some tools in order to answer a challenge and a problem. So I will present our work from the lens of the lessons learned and leave space for questions. Feel free to ask any questions. And then we'll go into a design framework, and you'll get a soft copy sent to you, which you can take home. So hopefully you get to apply that in your own setting. And by no means what we are presenting or the way that EG Capital is the right way. It really is very creative, very flexible. You need to be able to use those tools in your own context. So feel free to do it differently and not to take what I say for granted per se, right? It has to be fit for purpose and really designed in your own context. I'm not too sure what happened to the first page. All right. Okay. All right. So I'll tell you a little bit about EG Capital and the issues we're trying to solve and what tools that we use to solve those issues in that context. So we're using some of our presentation materials, but I'll sort of shape it in a different lens. So we're climate adaptation private credit platform. And I'll mention also, highlight the role of philanthropy in that multi-sector approach, which we're using with different investors and different actors. So the first challenge we're trying to solve in climate adaptation, and I'm sure you all know this, Africa produces less than 4% of global emissions, yet we're suffering 50 to 80% of the damage, and the speed is happening faster on the continent. So parts of Africa are warming up 2 to 3 times faster. Some parts we see already 40% higher rainfall. The climate investment opportunity has been sized at $2.8 trillion. Yet Africa only receives 3% of global climate finance. Within that, a lot of the climate finance is going towards renewable energy and mitigation. That leaves adaptation underfunded. When we dig a little bit deeper, 95% of climate adaptation financing is coming from a public source. So you can see the picture I'm painting in terms of the need to engage private sector. When we look at private sector investment in climate adaptation, it's really concentrated on climate tech VC and very large infra projects. What is it leaving in the middle? The SME financing. It's a story that we all know. So we've created a blended finance structure to solve for that. So that's what we're trying to solve for. Now, why SMEs and why climate adaptation? You may ask. Every single business on the continent is going to have to asset-proof their operations against climate risk. Access to water, access to energy, and procurement risk. If you're a food producer today, your input depends on the farmer, and that farmer is at risk of flood and droughts and other events. That's one part. The other part is some of the SMEs are already providing solutions for climate adaptation, like solar irrigation. The third part, which we're most excited about, is sustainable production and consumption, so building future resilience. The growth on the continent is formidable. And it really is about ensuring we're building future resilience. So import substitution, supply chain security, making sure we avoid repeating the mistakes of the developed markets. And you would say resilience and adaptation is ingrained in the African ethos to start with, because we know about scarcity, we know about affordability, and we know about nature. So today, we've broken, as a humanity, 6 out of the 9 planetary boundaries. Those planetary boundaries keep us in the life corridor on Earth. We're in the orange, not yet in the red. And the Earth has a huge power to regenerate itself, so it's not too late to go back. But we fundamentally need to switch how we consume and produce, and I would say Africa is the playground for adaptation investments. All the resources, water, arable land, energy, critical minerals, and we can certainly leapfrog and avoid repeating mistakes from elsewhere. And so that's the issues we're trying to solve for. And so SME financing is vital. Every SME will need CapEx, working capital, in order to grow, and to grow in a sustainable way, and to grow in a way that puts the human back in nature. If you think about it this way, our human intelligence has worked against the greater intelligence. And it's time we need to reverse that. So it's not about consuming less, it's consuming differently. Okay, so we'll talk about the blended finance instruments we've used to solve for that problem and how different actors are coming together. So, and then we'll talk also about why lending. So we talked about the climate investment opportunity being $2.8 trillion for the continent, with the potential to create 65 million jobs. We talked about the fact that in Africa, we only get 3% of global climate finance. The other side of the coin is, if we want to finance SMEs, we all know the stories. Banks are not lending. And when they do, it's 20 to 40% interest rate, short tenor, high collateral, limiting growth. When we look at the world's private credit market, which is over $2 trillion, 5% is going to emerging market, 0.3% is reaching Africa. So yes, there are capital sources in Africa, but there's also scarcity of capital when it comes to investment for many, many reasons. So we do need to bring flexible, long-term structured credit to SMEs for climate adaptation, for sure. And I'll give some example of that later on. Okay, I may not have slides. Yeah, I do? All right. Thank you. Maybe we can go to the next slide already. So we invest 60% in food security, 20% in health, resilience, and emergency response, and 20% in human capital. Again, let's go back to why are we looking at those sectors. Most people in climate adaptation are going to look at energy and forestry. And yes, food security as well, but most people forget about health and human capital. So let's go back to the impact of climate. There's a loss of biodiversity. There's also loss of lives due to heat and due to increased disease, malaria, dengue fever. When temperature rises 2%, this type of disease also increases. Therefore, you need to have generics, anti-malarial produced in Africa, reduce the long lead time it takes to come from India, or the expensive prices we pay with Europe. We also need emergency services because we do need to respond to disaster. If it rains a little bit in Nairobi, where I live, we have loss of lives due to floods. So health and emergency response, surveillance, technology response to these type of disasters is important, and disease also an essential medicine. Then the human capital aspect is the one that's most forgotten. Do you like to work when it's hot? Yeah. There's loss of productivity due to heat. If the factory is shut because the country doesn't have power, like what happened in Zambia over the last 2 years, there's loss of livelihoods. There's migration, people moving because of climate. On the positive side, there's job creation, skill sets that also needs to be invested in. So the human capital aspect is definitely worth having a look at for climate adaptation, we feel. Next slide before that, sorry, the slide before that. Yeah, thank you. Sorry about the technology today. So this is the blended finance structure we've created to answer these issues that we're trying to solve for. So we're a private credit fund. We invest in SMEs for the reasons I've mentioned. And in the fund, we need different actors. The point is mobilizing private sector capital. And we have a senior commercial tranche in the fund. We have a junior catalytic tranche where philanthropies, foundation, endowments come in. And we call them first loss because if there are losses, they agree to take the losses, and they're catalytic also on the return side of the equation as well. And then we have a guarantee, which we're completing together with the government of Sweden. So all that means that we're able to offer a risk-return profile to private sector capital. And by that, we mean pension fund, insurance companies, sovereign wealth funds, that they would invest when they would otherwise not invest. So those are the elements of what we call blended finance that we've put together in order to really mobilize private sector. We also have another innovation, which is a liquidity facility. You can forget the slides, I'm okay, because that's disturbing. The liquidity facility is effectively, typically, when you do private market funds, you're locked in for 10 years. But these pension funds and these insurance companies need short-term liquidity. Even though their liabilities are long-term, they need short-term liquidity. So they need to find a way out. So typically, they've really stayed away from private market funds like us. So we have a liquidity facility which is being put in place. It's backed by Société Générale, a French bank, and the European Commission. So that allows investors to select their maturity, 1 year, 3 year, 5 year, and they will be guaranteed 70 to 90% of the NAV payment within 10 days. So that facility effectively is really, really appreciated by pension funds and insurance companies that would otherwise really stay away from us. The other innovation is we've just finished the first close. And what have we achieved at first close? We achieved 80% private sector mobilization and 50% local African capital. We're preparing our second closing, and for the second closing, we are preparing a listing on the Nairobi Securities Exchange. Together with the facility, the liquidity facility I've mentioned earlier, we're able to be registered on the exchange and fully liquid. That is very attractive for a pension fund, an insurance company, a sovereign wealth funds from Africa. So the goal is to really mobilize local capital for African development. And that capital is at the table today for climate adaptation, for SME financing, for these kind of topics. Now, that capital wouldn't be here without the philanthropies that are willing to give the first loss catalytic capital. So for every dollar of philanthropic capital, we do 2 to 4 times mobilization of private sector on average. And that is how we could work hand in hand together to make sure that funding in a lot of SMEs are simply starved of capital, that it goes to the food producer and it goes to the farmers. Again, food security is 60% of the mandate, and we all know why we need to have these things in place. We can think about COVID and the sectors that we came to love, food, health, and education, right? Those are the same sectors that need to continue when you have climate disasters. So maybe I'll give an example, and then we'll open the floor for questions. So on the Nairobi Stock Exchange, we will mobilize about $40 million in private sector financing from Africa. For the first close, we had there about $20 million. And then we did the 10 to 15 million guarantee and the 30 million liquidity facility in place. So the target is next year we'll get to 100, 120. But this is an example of where our capital is going. So this is an SME in Zambia. So Zambia experienced over the last 2 years the worst droughts it had over the last 20 years. The country relies on hydropower, and there was a drought. So no more hydropower from Lake Kariba, huge drought. The country ran out of diesel generators. The factory could only operate 4 out of 24 hours a day. There was 2-year losses on the P&L. And this is a company that supplies 40% of the market share in soya products in Zambia, in the local market. It's not small. They needed an investment of $5 million to install solar power so that they could at least be 30% independent from the grid. They also need to make sure that their farmers are enabled. They work with 7,000 farmers, 50% women, on contract farming. What happens with the drought? Soya is quite climate resilient, but it still suffers from heat and water stress. These farmers need solar irrigation when they can't get it elsewhere. So they need power for irrigation. So that's an example of the investments that we're completing. And if we think also of soya, it's plant-based proteins. And this company is also exporting to the region. So another reason why we like it is it's exporting 30% in East Africa and in Ethiopia. The Christian Orthodox in Ethiopia are fasting for more than half the year. They cannot drink dairy milk, they drink soya milk. And the company does everything in soya. Soya milk, yogurt, snacks, tofu, meat replacement, porridge for early childhood nutrition, everything in soya, even animal feed. So that's also preparing for plant-based protein transition and this sustainable production and consumption. So I'll stop here and take your questions from the perspective of any technical terms I've mentioned you don't understand, raise your hand. Any burning questions, feel free to ask. And I want to make that as interactive as possible. And then I will show you a tool, a very simple tool. It's a one-pager tool that we've developed to help you to get something back that you can implement hopefully into your context. And there are many tools that we are using at the fund level, at the deal level. I've scratched a little bit the surface of the financial engineering, but that financial engineering, maybe you would expect it from a 1 billion or 10 billion fund. We're just a 100 million fund. We're very small in the asset management world. But the reason we really did all the effort of the financial engineering is because we have big questions to answer, and those big questions are trillion-dollar questions. And I want more people in this room. If we've done it, you can do it too. So we need more of these solutions out there because the amount of financing we need to mobilize is big. So we're starting small. We've done the financial engineering work, and we definitely need to scale, and we need to see others scaling. So I'll stop here, take your questions, and then we can see the tool at the end.
Sandrine, I'm going to, just because of time.
Okay.
If there's anybody with something burning, let me just please take one, allow me. Sure. Flash the tools, and you're going to get all of this. And then, because I don't want to rush Hillary at the end. I want to make sure all the insights are on the table so that we have some 15 minutes at the end for some more interactive Q&A. Is there anybody with a burning? Does this mean I'm just in a room of geniuses? They say that when you're in, the people you associate yourself with, eventually you become that. So this is exciting. I see genius coming my way soon. There's a question here. Okay.
Yeah, I think. Okay, thank you.
Okay. Thank you very much. This is Dr. Abdul Qasim Bashir from Planet Russia, Ethiopia. I really very much appreciated very well the situation where we present for us, especially blended financing. As you know, currently we have the seize of the funding environment. So there are a number of individuals who are looking our support on the ground. So having this to share for us is the engineering financing of how the brain financing system to implement the area where it be climate resilient aspects. One thing that I want to answer you have bring is the issue of climate resilience for Africa. They have about 50-80%, but they get fund is 3 to 5%. And that's really keen, the area we're looking for, how do you really ensure that you bring financing being enabling environment for the wash sector, for example, for the solar system, for the energy, and then how that's the financial engineering and architect as well is really enabling environment for the individuals, in a way, how the third party entertaining. Thank you.
I absolutely love that question. So I'll summarize it and let me know if I've understood it correctly. So the question is, with all this financial engineering, how do we make sure that, one, it's local African capital working for African development, as opposed to, by way of criticism, maybe foreign capital coming in and using climate adaptation maybe as a way to extract, right? That's one part of his question. The second part of the question that I think I heard is, how do we make sure that this financial engineering actually is on purpose and serves the beneficiaries at the end of the day that it's intended to serve? I got it? Okay. So I love that question. So yes, we've intentionally designed the product to serve an African investor. And what does that mean to serve an African investor if we want an African investor at the table? Well, it means providing the risk mitigations for that investor to be at the table. So when we have a guarantee from the Kingdom of Sweden, when we have a liquidity guarantee, it allows that investor to come at the table knowing that his losses are protected, his liquidity is ensured, his risk return meets his fiduciary mandate as a pension fund that ultimately will pay the pension of teachers and nurses. That's one. We also protect the dollar reserves of those institutions as well, because if we invest in these SMEs, the local currency tends to depreciate, but if we have a local investor at the table, they make a gain because we've protected their US dollar reserve. So that's also building resilience at the top of the structure. So we intentionally designed the structure to benefit a local investor. A foreign investor would tend to have a currency loss, but a local investor tends to have a currency gain. And that's important for these institutional capital. The other aspect is around, how do we know that this is a climate adaptation investment, and why, and is it delivering the outcome where we need to see it at the farmer level, at the community level? And there are many frameworks. There's over 50 taxonomies for climate adaptation investments. Rwanda has one, Kenya is developing one as well. The EU has a green taxonomy too. So we've been working with UNEP-FI, which has developed a tool for climate adaptation investments. It was published earlier in April this year. And then the next project is around sort of harmonizing these taxonomies. And I think 80% they are really connected, but 20% they're still a little bit different. For us, we can assess climate risk. You have companies these days, if you look at Zurich Re and others, you can give them the coordinates on the map wherever you are on the planet, maybe except the oceans, and they will immediately, within a matter of seconds, give you the climate risk of that geolocation. But how do we understand vulnerability? That is really something that you need to be close to the ground, close to the beneficiaries. You need to ask. So we do beneficiary surveys, and we're a 10-year fund, so we track over time. So measuring vulnerability is really, are the farmers better equipped when there is another drought? Have they received the training, the equipment, the solar irrigation, the climate resilient crops to be able to resist and do better and preserve their earning in the next climate event? And often it's around women as well, right? It's food, health, education. So are women able to maintain their livelihoods and their income throughout these climate shocks? So we do beneficiary surveys, and we monitor that also over time to actually understand if the vulnerability is actually decreasing. Not just we've invested in the right bucket, because we know the buckets, we have the science already around that, but really we need to be close to the ground to understand if the vulnerability is decreasing.
Thank you. I'm just going to ask you to share the tools now, because really not
so
time. I don't want to rush Hilary at the end. So.
Yeah, no, exactly. So super quickly, this is just a framework that you can think about to apply it in your own organization. So think about the investment objective of the different investors at the table, including philanthropies. Is it market return? Is it catalytic capital? Is it a risk mitigation strategy? A guarantee or a liquidity facility doesn't have a return objective. It's only here to protect the risk. So think about the different actors and what their investment objectives are. And then the second aspect is to think about the type of risk you're trying to protect. Is it market risk, liquidity risk, emerging manager risk, climate risk? What are you trying to mitigate for? What are the concerns of that particular stakeholder or constituency? And then it's trying to match that investor or constituency to the specific risk, and then looking at the specific tool that's going to answer and mitigate that risk. And you have tools at the fund level and the deal level. So at the fund level, we talked about it already, you have blended finance, you have senior commercial capital, first loss junior equity, that's where our philanthropies come. You have risk mitigation tools at the fund level. At the deal level, you have credit risk insurance, FX hedges that allows you to hedge for currency risk. You have political risk insurance as well, and technical assistance, really also helping your portfolio companies and measure the impact. So think about the different tools you have and the different risk categories you're trying to mitigate. And then think about the capital stack, which is all the constituencies that are available in the ecosystem to come and help you solve your problem. Not just one group. Think about family offices, think about philanthropies, endowments, pension funds, insurance companies, corporates, banks. And why would they come to the capital stack, and what is their role? And finally, the mobilization targets. So think about, if you do all this work in the structure, what do you want the mobilization target to be? And we care about private sector mobilization. We care even more about African capital mobilization. And then finally, and firstly, the impact, right? So we've linked 50% of our remuneration as a fund manager to 5 categories of impact. So we have skin in the game. So job creation, climate adaptation, gender equity, intra-Africa regional trade. So up to 80% of our portfolio is intra-Africa regional trade. Why? That's resilience, that's import substitution. And private sector mobilization. So on these 5 criteria, we have 50% of our remuneration that hangs on that, not just the financial returns. Yeah, and I think it's a pretty easy tool. It's to start the discussion, and hopefully that's useful when you take it back home to your context. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Lots of food for thought. I'm going to rush now quickly on to you, Hilary. So switching a little bit. Keep your questions and thoughts. They're still around, in as far as I know. I don't think they're going anywhere. So if we don't get them to them in plenary, you can catch them at the break. But Hilary is a researcher around innovative finance at the Bartha Center for Social Innovation and Entrepreneurship at UCT. So very excited to hear your thoughts and your perspective, Hilary. Over to you.
Thank you very much. So we are now stress testing this innovative finance structure, or our blended finance structure. Why should we do this? Because you find that there is a tension that always exists when we are looking at blended finance structure, or when we're looking at innovative finance mechanism. a tension that exists between risk, so who carries that risk, right? And there's also tension around equity. Who is benefiting and how are the beneficiaries protected when things do not work as planned? I think this maybe hits closer to home to most of you who are in the NGO sector and work directly with beneficiaries. Then there's also the issue of financial sustainability. So who ultimately pays the cost for making the model to work? And how can this model sustain itself? So this now is where guardrails come in. And the guardrails pretty much look at the aspect that with innovative finance mechanism, and this is what evidence from the research that we've done has shown us, that risk or cost is not removed. It is distributed amongst the actors. And in this case, the actors could be either an NGO that is providing an intervention, it could be the funder, it could be, if we go back to Sandrine's structure, it could be someone who's either giving the first loss capital guarantee or the investor who is now putting in their money into this whole intervention, into this whole program. So now, because risk is not removed, it is redistributed, there are three key questions that emerge, right? Who benefits and who is protected when things do not go wrong, right? And then I also spoke about who carries the risk. Now, the 5 guardrails pretty much get you to reflect on 5 things. So the first one is success. Who determines the outcomes of your deal or of your intervention? Where does the downside risk sit? That's question number 2. What about the pricing? Who pays the cost of the capital? Number 4, what safeguards exist for the end users? And the 5th one is data. Can accountability function in practice? So the structure is only equitable if risk, cost, and accountability are visible and you can really see them. So what we're going to do for the next few minutes is something a bit practical, right? I've shared around the toolkit. So you have with you the guardrails. We are pretty much going to go through this case study and discuss. This is how we envisage you making use of that toolkit in your programming or when you're doing your deal structuring. So this comes right at the beginning, before you put pen to paper to sign your financing deal, right? So here's an example that we're going to work with, right? It's a blended finance facility that is designed to expand access to vocational training for low-income youth. And the way the capital is structured is that 20% of it is philanthropic first loss. Then there's also an impact investor who's putting in 12 to 15%. So that's Andrew there coming in with his impact investment, right? And then we also have an outcomes funder. So the outcomes funder is the one who is paying for the results. In this case, our outcomes are pretty much the percentage of youth who are employed within 12 months, the minimum income threshold that can be achieved, and also an independently verification of these outcomes. So now the facility is presented in a way to reduce barriers to training, crowd in private capital, and align incentives around the employment outcomes. So just going to our guardrails, the first guardrail looks at success. So maybe we can take a few minutes, and what might be more practical is maybe after you reflect on this, I'll ask 1 or 2 people to just share their reflections. So looking at this here, who defines the outcomes in this case? In this program where we're looking at access to vocational training, who has defined the outcomes and how deep are these outcomes? So how deep do they address the problem? How deep do they address the poverty? How deep do they address the access to vocational training in the community, right? Are end users clearly prioritized in the outcomes that we are putting as the triggers for the payment? And Are success measures balanced between access, quality, affordability, and sustainability? So those are some of the questions you should be asking yourself as you structure your deal. Maybe if I can hear your thoughts in this regard here, who do you think would have made the outcomes? Who defines these outcomes? Is it the NGO? Yeah, there's a hand this end. Where's the microphone?
I don't know about the other side of the room, but just because that's where I do work, so first thing I would ask is what's the vocational training? What are they training in?
This is
Doesn't matter.
It doesn't matter. It's just
Okay.
vocational training. So,
Okay.
so this is a fictitious case.
I think it's you asked the question of who defines the outcome.
Yes,
It's the facility managers.
the facility managers. So in this case, we are saying the NGO or the organization that is running this intervention.
Not that they didn't participate, but just the performance triggers are a bit on the tight.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Remember, this is a fictitious case.
Yeah.
When the whole idea is, let us understand the guardrails, and if we go and use them in our organizations as we think around this deal structure, and this is what we would be doing. So the first part is let us reflect on who defines success. So that's the first governance guardrail I'd like us to look at. Who defines success? So who is defining these outcomes?
Ideally, it should be both parties.
Both parties.
Yeah.
Can you define the both parties? Can you tell us who are the both parties?
Well, the fund managers and the NGO that is running the course.
Okay.
Yeah.
There's a hand there and there's one here.
I'm not sure if I'm answering the question. I'm just so challenged and also very encouraged that we actually looking at genuine blended finance, and I wonder how we get there quick enough. But I see the outcome as value to those payers. And so if the work is genuinely not going to contribute to transformation that people see as valuable, they're not going to pay. But then if that ownership on the ground by those that are doing the work is not so strong, it's also not going to work. And so the buzzword of true co-creation here, but it has to be both. And it's also those catalytic funders that are risking, because at the end of the day, it's change that's going to lead to development that we're contributing to. But I don't see how you can have one without the other.
Okay. The lady in the front here, as she comes in with her answer, I just want us to reflect when all actors come in to determine the outcomes. Please.
Thank you. Am I okay sitting?
It's up to you.
Okay. I've been sitting with the same questions, even as you gave out these handouts and the like, and I've been reflecting back on the work that I do. And honestly speaking, I think the real experts, who are the end users, should be the ones defining the outcomes. Us, the technical experts, should actually be sitting at the back and listening and prioritizing. And I think it brought me back to the approach that I use in the work that which is called the Ask, Listen, Act. We start by asking the real experts, who are the people who are wearing the shoe, where is it pinching most? What do they want to see? Because that is the only way we can think sustainability, ownership, and everything else. But then us as the technical experts, our work is to support the real experts to really drive the change that they want to see. So for me, I think it's the real experts who are the end users. Thank you.
So someone gets it. That is the key thing around this governance and guardrails. Where are the end users in all this? Because the NGO maybe is more concerned with visibility. They want to write a good donor report at the end, right? The other actors in there, whether it's the first loss capital people or the impact investors, they are concerned with returns. So for them, as long as the figures make sense, those are the key outcomes that matter to them. But where is the end user? This is also what becomes key. So that's also when you look at, if you look at the other prompt on the guardrail, success measures balance between access, quality, affordability, and sustainability. those are the outcomes or the success measures that would come from the end users themselves, right? Quickly, just moving on to the second guardrail. I won't have time to go through all 5. But the second guardrail, let's look at risk, right? And the question is, where does downside risk sit? Who absorbs loss if outcomes are not achieved? Is risk genuinely shared or shifted downstream? Is each actor's risk appetite aligned with the role they are expected to play? Are providers and end users exposed to hidden risk? So these are some of the reflective questions you can ask as you structure your deal. Where are we placing risk and how are we placing it? I think I would like to hear from the guys at my left side. If you're to be looking at the risk questions here, right? Who absorbs the first loss? I gave as an example that maybe the 20% philanthropic first loss, so the philanthropic company or organization absorbs the first loss. But as you reflect on your deal, is that realistic? Anyone who wants to share? When we're looking at risk, this is now also, I think, you're now de-risking. Remember we said risk is not removed, but it is transferred. It's just like energy. Energy is not lost, but it's transferred elsewhere. So, okay, I think there's a hand here.
Hi. I think that the nature of first loss would be to just provide money, to provide a grant, and then that grant, usually it could be either project-oriented or multi-year, and then that would technically provide an incentive for other additional money to come in. But the grant comes with this assumption that there might be mismanagement, there might be some losses, there might be some staff who might be paid, who might stay or not stay. And this is how I see it. Maybe.
Okay, no, that's a fair position. I just want to leave you with one last one. If we look at pricing, because pricing is a tricky one in most of our interventions, right? Like in this case here, the one for vocational training. Who pays for the cost of the capital? How are the investors' returns, financing costs covered, right? Are costs passed to funders, providers, or end users? So these are some of the reflective questions you can have. In this case here, in our case study at the moment, we're not told whether there are any costs that are incurred by the end users, right? So the assumption is that the cost is incurred by the providers and the outcomes payer. Remember, we've got an outcomes funder who is then going to pay that impact investor should all these performance triggers be achieved. But there's a twist, and this is what I want to leave you thinking of. There's an additional information that suggests that the providers for this training are actually thinking of different pricing arrangement, and they want to charge the participants. So they're charging the participants, and to make it to twist it a little bit, this vocational training is being provided at a college. So at that college, you also have students who are not funded through this organization. But because they are coming through some funding, the ones who are funded, the college is actually charging them slightly more than the non-funded students. Because in the way the deal was structured, the funders, the impact funders, did not put enough on the philanthropic funding to cover the first loss. So it has to be covered by the institution that is linking with the students. So there we have an example where in the structuring, the pricing is not equitable. The cost of capital is actually being passed to the end users. And that goes back to a point that was raised earlier on in the morning. We're talking about poverty, we're talking about transforming lives. And if we come in with a program that is structured like this, we are not answering that question. Because at the end of the day, we are just coming into people who are impoverished and taking advantage of them and actually coming out with more, because if we're going to put a premium to the pricing of them accessing tuition, because in the first place, they cannot pay for the tuition, but someone says, okay, I'll pay for it. But when you repay, because I am able to give you $10 now, but when you pay back, you're giving me $12. Have we done any justice there? Thank you very much. So I hope you'll be able to use these guardrails in your work. And I'll leave the floor for questions.
A thought, a very specific question to any of the panelists. Very specific. Please do not give background. Just ask the question very specifically. If you can direct it to somebody, please do. I want to prioritize. Okay, so we'll have, I saw your hand first. Very specific. I'll cut you short like that guy who was trying to cut us. All right, here.
So, thank you. I think my question goes to my friend from KCB, but could also be applicable to my other colleagues. So, we are talking about blended finance for a quasi business-like transactions, but just can we also think of, when we talk about philanthropy, we are talking about social services also, like providing sanitary pads in the school or clean drinking water for kids. So the question is how applicable, how adaptable this blended finance will be for social services.
Think about it as I take a few more questions. I'll take yours. I saw your hand. I'm coming to you.
Thank you very much. My name is Eliza Fan Nugich from Nguzo Africa Community Foundation. Thank Eileen from KCB. So we've been struggling to meet the corporates in Kenya, and I think EAPN has done a lot to bring them. They are not very much accessible, but they are trying to be accessible from CSR to ESGC reporting. So my specific question is, do we have a policy in Kenya or in East Africa to say which percentage of corporate profit goes to social investments? Because others are saying 1%, others are saying 2%. So we need it to be even 10%, but yeah.
Thank you. Think about it. Now, okay.
Okay, so I'll go straight without any backgrounds. Yeah? I have the first question to KCB. How do you think about de-risking proven health interventions, especially from a social enterprise perspective, that generates measurable economic returns, but do not fit traditionally in the traditional financing models? The second question goes to New Africa Fund. I saw in one of your slides suggested that dependency is the issue rather than scarcity of capital, right? So how do you assess whether a social impact model is reducing dependency and building resilience at the community and institutional level? And what indicators gives you the signal of readiness for catalytic or blended financing investments?
Mine is very brief, directed to Andrew. I'm just curious about the 4 countries that you mentioned that you're currently doing the impact investing in. Is Kenya one of them? And also the ticket sizing that you have.
Okay, my question also goes to Andrew. From your experience in our efforts to localize funding, where should the skill set focus on, or where should we localize on in adapting this?
Good afternoon. My name is Sophie Onyango from M-Pesa Foundation in Kenya. My question goes to Hilary. In grant making, Hilary, is there really one entity that bears the first loss? Because as a grant maker, I can imagine that even when you're giving the grant, you give it in tranches. And the NGO that is implementing the program definitely has a loss, a reputation loss as well. So is there really one entity that bears the first loss? Thank you.
Thank you. I'm Victoria Zila from Kenya. And my question goes to the lady representing EG Capital. That was a very good presentation. And when you are talking about the opportunities that exist when it comes to financing climate adaptation, I'm just curious, coming from Western Kenya where you have the largest rainforest, and we are now having a conversation on carbon credit, how do you collaborate and how can those interested in that line of investment work with you, considering I'm also a legislator and I realize we have very serious policy gaps that can help us achieve that? Thank you.
Thank you for your generosity. Chris is my name. I am from Rwanda. Mine goes to you, Sandrine. You know, the blended finance structures you presented are really great. But the tendency is they are designed to de-risk mostly the investment, the funders, the investors. And my question is, in your experience, what practical mechanism have you seen that are really, really making sure that local organizations and communities are not unintentionally becoming the risk absorbers?
I must say you're a bit biased on the other side. We are feeling orphaned. Nonetheless, my name is Hawa Maria. I am from Kenya. And my question goes to Paris and Andrew. And I want to know that for small organization, I am a founder of a community-based organization, and we do not have audited accounts, collateral, and we've not even received our first funding. If there's a funder open to funding organizations, feminist organizations. So my question is, what is the actual first step to enter into blended finance and with any of your organization? And also, is there like a readiness program that we can get into to ensure we align ourselves with the requirements for blended finance in any of your institutions? Thank you.
I'll go first and hopefully help people demystify blended finance. Because to answer you, yes, blended finance can be used for socially inclined projects where you are not generating any revenue. That's where the key question comes: what are the outcomes and who determines them, right? So we do have social impact bonds, we have development impact bonds, we have outcomes-based finance, which has been used where NGOs put in their programs. And that also maybe answers your question, my orphaned sister from Kenya. NGOs can get into blended finance. It's not, I think, remove the picture or the veil that it's the bank or the commercial sector that starts this. You can work on your deal or structuring your deal starting from your perspective in terms of what you want to achieve in your area, in your community, and then identify the key people who then fund this. At the end of the day, the key question is who is paying for the outcomes. This is what is key. Is it a private entity? Is it a commercial entity? That's when it no longer becomes a social impact bond. In some instances, governments have paid for outcomes that have a social impact. In other instances, development investment banks have paid for the outcomes. So that is what becomes key. Who is the outcomes payer? Then the other point, there was a point on risk and carrying loss, or I think someone said there's no entity that does not absorb. At the end of the day, in your structure, someone is going to absorb that risk. Someone is going to absorb that loss. The question is, what is your appetite for risk as an organization? As an NGO, are you prepared to absorb the risk? If you're not, then maybe this is where you transfer it to a philanthropic organization that is going to give you a grant that you don't have to repay. As an impact investor, are you able to absorb the risk? In that instance, that means the interest that you are expecting to get back is way lower than what is being offered in the market. In some unfortunate instances, you then have the risk being passed on to the end user in the pricing, in the cost. But in all instances, especially if you've got a social aspect of it. You want to try to protect the end user or the beneficiary and make sure that the risk is absorbed upfront and not in the community. Thank you.
Okay.
I think there were 4 questions. I hope I remember them. So the quickest one to answer was what countries are we currently have investments in? Rwanda, Kenya, Togo, and Ghana. That's what we've invested in so far. It has no bearing on what we will do in the future. So as I said, all of the investments in our portfolio come through this fundraising training program that you've heard about. We have organizations and SMEs from 37 countries that have come through the program so far. I anticipate a year from now, those 4 countries might be 10 or more countries. So it has no bearing on where we're going. The question I loved was around collateral and audited statements. So I spent a lot of time talking with family offices and foundations and American charities. And that's usually the first 2 questions they ask is, how do you know that the financials that you're being told are real? And if you're going to do an investment in any structure, what collateral are they putting up? And usually the audited statements, we request them. We provide alternatives. If that's not something that the organization has done, or I can go into all sorts of use cases, but we provide alternatives. That's not necessarily a deal breaker for us. Now, we're a charity, we're not a bank. That's usually where banks would leave the room, but we have more flexibility as a charity. And the second thing around collateral, I get that question very frequently, even from the businesses that we invest in. They say, I don't know what I would put up as collateral for this investment. And that's why that was the primary driver for the recoverable grant format, because the reality is, we're a charity. Most of the money that we bring to the table is philanthropic money. Most of the collateral that could be put up by the companies or the organizations that we invest in is not productive to have on the balance sheet of a philanthropy or a charity. So, and this is also where the banks would leave the room usually, is when I say the best replacement to collateral is actually trust in the founder and trust in the organization. Because the trust that we have in the founders that we invest in, the companies that we invest in the solutions that they're coming up with, is far more valuable in the present and in the future than any collateral they could put up. When we talk about if it's a manufacturing operation, if they're going to put up their machinery as collateral, what would we do to actually monetize that to recoup a lost investment? It would be vicious. It would be probably a loss just in the effort to try and recoup that, and it's not productive. So I would rather spend 10 times the amount of time building relationship with the organization or the SME that we invest in than trying to figure out what to do with collateral on the back end of a bad deal. And that's what I tell all of the philanthropists that we work with. And there was a question around, the statement I made around there's no shortage of capital. I firmly believe there is no shortage of capital, and those of us who are in spaces, especially with philanthropists and foundations and family offices in Europe and in North America, our job is to, one, point that capital towards the organizations and the SMEs that are represented here, and then find pathways to mobilize that money. And if we can do both of those things, if we can provide the exposure, because someone mentioned on the stage that there's just a lack of awareness of what opportunities there are, that's true. If we can point the capital in the right direction, and those of us that have a presence here on the ground can actually mobilize that and turn that into deal flow and deal structures that make sense, that are rewarding for everyone involved, and can have impact, we can start to see more of that capital that's sitting with potential energy on the sidelines move towards things that we're all talking about here. I know I didn't answer the other 2, but we don't have time. So thanks.
I'll take a lesson in brevity. So I'll answer the agroforestry question, and how do we make sure that the cost of blending finance is not simply distributed down to the beneficiary, destroying the impact effectively we're trying to deliver. The agroforestry question is really, really interesting. And Africa, and there are some reports coming out that looks at African forest, the Congo Basin and others, that are basically some of the last remaining carbon sinks and reservoir we have in the world. If you look at the Amazon, which everybody would have top of mind, and the investments that have gone to that, and you compare to how much has been invested in African forests, well, you know the picture is the same picture as everywhere else. It's been really underinvested in Africa, yet some reports are coming out to say that actually African forests may have the ability to absorb more carbon per hectare than the Amazon. But it's currently at threat because of deforestation and conservation. So the question of agroforestry is really, really interesting. So preserving the forest, but also looking at the productive use of the forest, and linking that back to food security as well. So a lot of crops actually are in harmony with the forest, like honey, nuts, also have like tea, coffees as well, that we've sort of grown into kind of forest environments as well. So very, very interesting question in terms of the investment potential of forests, the link back to food security, and the need to invest in our forests, because there are some of we've underlooked the potential of African forests to be some of the carbon reservoir for the rest of the planet in terms of absorbing CO2 emissions.
Sorry, please, let's just also be precise. I've been told to get out. I'm in unauthorized airspace, I'm told.
Great. So, and the other question on the beneficiary, effectively, everything we do is around the mandate of the fund. So local production, local jobs, import substitution. The dairy company in Zambia has made soya milk cheaper than dairy milk, which is an innovation. In Rwanda, we're looking at production of local generics, and we're looking at distribution, cold chain, so that, again, we reduce import dependency on China, India, or Europe. So affordability, access, local job, local production, that is the definition of resilience. And that's what we build in our investment. We wouldn't invest otherwise.
Paris, you have the sad task of responding in 2 minutes max.
Yes, and thankfully the moderators have responded to most of the questions that came up. So very specific question to KCB regarding their policies on social investments, and my colleague Alex is here as well. While there might not be a policy on how much a bank or an organization, say NSO Safaricom is here as well, should put towards CSR or the foundation, that conversation is now shifting from how much are you putting in to the impact that you're having in your business in terms of measurable and sustainable, impact actually. So, and that's what I said when I began, beyond traditional banking, and of course banks, for instance, are viewed as profit-making enterprises, what impact are you actually creating? Then someone else asked, how are we playing in terms of blended finance for health interventions, for instance? And I think maybe just to give an example, we recently, or in the last 2 years, got accredited by GCF. And what this means is that GCF gives you funding to drive the climate change agenda and the green energy agenda, of course. And what do you do then in the various sectors that cut across when it comes to green financing? So for the health sector, for instance, we are now deploying this capital where hospitals and health facilities can do solarization of their facilities and even adapt clean cooking, which then eventually means that they're able to reduce their costs and have their revenues raised. So maybe these are some of the interventions that we're doing. Then maybe lastly, and I think maybe I can just maybe give this as a closing remark, blended finance should simplify access and not complicate execution. I feel like maybe that's an item or an avenue that can easily come in, where you're now deploying all these instruments, and what was once a very simple process and benefit to the end users becomes very complicated. That's not the aim or the goal of blended finance. And maybe lastly, and Sandrine mentioned this, and Hilary, in terms of when you're deploying all these blended finance models and all that, and it ends up becoming very costly to the end user, I feel like there are very many other items that we need to keep into consideration. For instance, the role of technical assistance. And the NGOs here, which purely focus on that. Capacity building being done by some of the foundations represented here. And at the end of the day, what impact are you trying to create? Because if your aim is to create employment, resilience, enhance livelihoods, the day you leave that community and the day the grants are cut out and you're not able to continue giving aid, will you have left that community empowered and economically viable even as individuals? Thank you.
Thank you. On that mic drop, please follow them along the corridors gently and continue the conversations. Thank you very much. I think a round of applause. That's been a beautiful combination of, it was a blended input into a potentially complex question, but I think thank you very much.